I've put a coat of the black wash on the entire rock face, and as you can see, this is starting to look pretty good now. So at this point, you've got a decision to make. You can either stick with this shade, or if you want, put a second coat of the wash on and go a little bit darker. Now, whatever decision you make sure that you let the first coat dry before making a decision, because the color when it dries is a lot different from when it's wet. So make sure it's completely dry before making a decision on whether to go with a second coat. As for me, I want this rock to match the rest of the rock in my layout, so I'm going to go one shade darker and do a second coat. So I'm going to go ahead and put that second coat of the wash on now. I'll be back in just a second. Okay, the second coat of the black color wash is dry, and at this point the rock face is technically done. But what I'm going to do now is make some additional color washes, and we'll use those to enhance the rock and make it look a little more realistic. I've got 3 color washes here, and these are acrylic color washes just like the black wash we just used, and they're about 95% water and 5% paint, really thin. Right here I've got a burnt umber wash, kind of brown. Right here is a raw sienna wash, it's kind of a mustard yellow. And then right here, this is a burnt sienna wash, which is kind of reddish. And these are the 3 main colors that I use when I'm enhancing my rocks. You can use whatever colors you want, but if you're new at this, I would probably recommend starting off with earth tone type colors like browns, yellows, and reds, because those tend to look more natural and they're easier to work with at first. I'm going to start right here. One of the things that I like to do with color washes is to simulate the effect of running water, because when water runs down a rock face, it carries soil and other debris with it, and it erodes the rock and stains the rock. So on a place like this where I can visualize the water running down, I'm going to start with my burnt umber wash, which is the brown color, and just start pulling it up at the top and then let it run down naturally, just like rainwater would. And it'll just run down the entire rock face all the way down to the table. And what you'll get is a nice realistic look. And just keep doing this up on top, and it'll just keep running down. And then once I've got enough brown in there, I might change over to my burnt sienna, which is that red color. Give it a little red. That. And this is when it's really important to have a really thin wash, because a thick wash will add too much color and it'll be overdone and won't look right. But a thin wash, you can just keep adding layers. So what I'm going to do is let this dry, and then we'll take a look at it and I'll decide if I want to add some more color to it. I've let the color wash dry, and as you can see, it's a nice faint color now, and I'm going to leave it like this for right now. You know, when you're doing scenery, it's usually a good philosophy to play it a little conservatively and just build up the scene layer by layer and have some patience. And, you know, I may come back and add some more color to this later, but for right now, I'm just going to leave it as is and build up the rest of the scene around it. And as the scene continues to grow and mature, I may eventually come back and add more color, but for right now, I'm going to leave it as is and move on to something else. Something else that I'll do with the color washes is maybe like in an area like this, I want to just put a little color variation in the layers of rock. So maybe with my raw sienna wash, that's the kind of mustard yellow color, I'll get the brush wet like that, and then what I'll do is just sort of dab it on a paper towel real gently so that the brush is just barely wet, and then I'll just very gently brush on a little coloring, just like that. Very subtle coloring, and I can always come back and add another layer if I want to, but you want to start off very subtle and then just build up the layers like I was talking about, just like that. And just use your imagination, do whatever you feel looks right. It's usually very difficult to completely screw up a scene as long as you do it in very subtle layers and just build it up. You know, it's hard to make a mistake, so just feel free to experiment and do what you think looks good on your layout. Another area where I like to use the color washes is down here at the bottom where the rock meets the table. Eventually I'm going to put, soil and grass and other vegetation down here. So in preparation for that, a lot of times what I'll do is put a pretty thick coat of the burnt umber wash down here. And that sort of just gives a brown coloration to the rock and will make the scene look better once this is covered with soil and grass and so forth. And I'll do the same thing up here on top, where there's going to be large patches of vegetation and soil. I'll prepare it with some of the burnt umber wash. Alright, once you've added any additional color washes to your rocks, it's time for one of the last steps in this project, which is to add soil, vegetation, and ground cover to our scene. What I've got right here is an assortment of scenery materials that I use on my layout. Now this certainly isn't everything that I use, but it is sort of the core arsenal of materials that I use on a day-to-day basis to just have a good foundation of scenery on my layout. Now what you're seeing is stuff from two manufacturers. The stuff in the middle here is from Woodland Scenics. Most of you are probably already familiar with Woodland Scenics. You can go to their website at www.woodlandscenics.com, or you can find their materials in most hobby shops. The Woodland Scenics materials that I use most often are the Bushes Clump Foliage Olive Green variety, Fine Turf Earth, Coarse Turf Burnt Grass, Bushes Clump Foliage Forest Blend, Coarse Turf Yellow Grass, Coarse Turf Conifer, Fine Turf Yellow Grass, and then Blended Turf Earth Blend. And then down here I've got some of their field grass, and then I've got a couple colors of flowers down here as well. The materials on either side here are made by Brennan's Model Railroading. That's a company that's run by Dennis Brennan. Dennis is an expert at doing high rail scenery. In fact, a while back he published a book on high rail scenery that I highly recommend. At the end of this video, I'll show you that book. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I use Dennis's ballast to ballast my track, but he makes a whole slew of other scenery materials as well. Right here I've got his ground cover and undergrowth materials. I've got the fine ground cover, the coarse ground cover, and then the natural earth undergrowth. And I use these to simulate the look of dead leaves, branches, and just other stuff you find on the ground when you're outside. And then over here, I've got his line of sands. I've got the coarse superior sand, the fine superior sand, the Rock Creek sand, and then up here, the Kaw Valley sand. Now, of course, his materials don't come in these nice plastic containers. I put them in these containers just because it's easier to use them. When you buy them, they'll come in these plastic bags. If you want to get to Dennis's site, it's www.brennansmodelrr.com. Now, obviously, these are not the only scenery materials that you have to choose from. There are dozens of brands and hundreds of products on the market. This is just what I use, but you don't have to use it if you don't want to. You can use whatever brands and products you want, and feel free to experiment with different brands and different products until you find something that you do like. If you're new to scenery, you may want to start off using this stuff, but once you come into your own and you have your own preferences, you may or may not want to use this stuff in the end. So it's entirely up to you. Anyway, this is the stuff we're going to use today, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll put some scenery down on these rocks. Before we lay down any ground cover, you're going to need these two items. Right here we've got a 50-50 mixture of Elmer's white glue and water. I've put it in a squirt bottle to make it a little easier to apply, but if you don't have a squirt bottle, you can just put the glue in a cup and use an eyedropper to apply the glue. If you want one of these squirt bottles, you can get them at Brennan's Model Railroading, and you can also sometimes find them in beauty shops. Right here we've got 91% isopropyl alcohol, and I've attached a little spray nozzle up on top. This is going to be used as a wetting agent. Alternatively, if you don't want to use isopropyl alcohol as a wetting agent, you can use what's called wet water. And what you do is you just take some plain water, you add a couple drops of dish soap, and it becomes wet water, and it's a good wetting agent. But regardless of whether you use isopropyl alcohol or wet water, you still want to have a spray nozzle on top so that it's easier to apply to the layout. Now, if you don't know what a wetting agent is in the first place, in a few minutes I'll explain it to you.